USC and UCLA are joining the Big Ten. The Pac-12 is pursuing expansion. The Big 12 could expand to add Pac-12 teams. Those are huge dominoes in college football realignment and expansion this offseason. But the rest of college football expansion and realignment talk and potential moves hinge on one team, Notre Dame. Let's break down why the Fighting Irish hold all of the cards to realignment and expansion. I'm Stephen Lassen. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Stephen L. CFB, for more college football in-season, preseason, and all things covering realignment and expansion. Before we get into why Notre Dame is the team that holds all of the cards to realignment, let's take a look at their current situation. Obviously, things are going well for the Fighting Irish. As an FBS independent, they've made the playoff a couple times. New coach Marcus Freeman, an outstanding hire to replace Brian Kelly. They play games against ACC teams every year. On average, that's about 5 a season. They are tied to the ACC through 2035, 36, and playing those games every year. Scheduling, not a problem. Playoff access, not a problem either for the Fighting Irish, obviously, as we've seen since the inception of the college football playoff. Also, homes for other sports outside of football in terms of conference play are not a problem. So right now, Notre Dame, as an FBS independent, not a ton of threats to that. So even though there have been a lot of moves in realignment and expansion for college football over the last 10 to 15 years, Notre Dame's current situation has worked well in the past and continues to work well right now. So there's not a major rush for Notre Dame to change that calculus. Although things are going well for Notre Dame right now, let's consider what's going on in college football today. The sport is consolidating around the Big Ten and the SEC. Both of these conferences have 16 teams. The Big Ten just adding USC and UCLA. The SEC adding Oklahoma and Texas last offseason. So the sport itself is consolidating around the Power 2 instead of the Power 5. Did the additions of USC and UCLA change anything for Notre Dame? Is a question that looms over realignment and expansion. The Big Ten is now a coast-to-coast conference. The revenue for this conference is only going to increase, especially in television value. When you can put Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, Penn State, Wisconsin, USC, and UCLA in the same conference, it's going to be huge in terms of financial revenue. The gap between the rest of college football and the Big Ten and SEC in terms of financials is growing and is only going to continue to grow in the future. Where does Notre Dame fit into that? The other question for Notre Dame to consider is the future of the college football playoff. The future of the playoff is up in the air. Right now, it's just a 4-team format for the next couple years. The 12-team format that was proposed has yet to be accepted into the future. So the uncertainty surrounding the playoff, could the Big Ten and SEC just stage their own playoff and cut out the rest of college football? Or will the 12-team playoff just simply be accepted in the future? That would be probably the best case scenario for Notre Dame, especially in terms of access as an at-large team every year into a potentially 12-team playoff. So now that we've covered Notre Dame's current situation and the key questions surrounding this program, let's dive into why Notre Dame is the team holding all of the cards in realignment. The reasons why are pretty simple. If Notre Dame wants to join a conference, a major shakeup is coming to college football. Consider the ramifications. Notre Dame would probably be most interested in joining the Big Ten. That would give the Big Ten 17 teams, meaning they need to add another team to get to 18 or grow even bigger to 20 to 22 teams. The SEC would probably be forced to respond. Notre Dame is technically tied to the ACC through that 2035, 36, 37 window. that we mentioned, and the ACC also affords the opportunity to play more games across the East Coast, Southeast. So an interesting dynamic would unfold if Notre Dame decides to join a conference, because the ramifications could be significant for 3 or 4 Power 5 leagues. The ACC, if they could not land Notre Dame, it would be a hit to their potential future revenues. And of course, the Big Ten would like nothing more to add Notre Dame to a conference that already features USC, Ohio State, and Michigan. As you can see, the domino effect across college football waiting for Notre Dame to decide whether or not to potentially join the Big Ten is significant. The ACC would certainly like to add the Fighting Irish as a full-time member. The Big Ten would as well. If none of those are able to land the Fighting Irish and they remain an FBS independent, I would expect realignment to slow some in the Power 5 conferences for the foreseeable future. Uncertainty surrounding conference realignment and expansion is a big story in college football right now. So to summarize, let's look at Notre Dame's options for the future. The Fighting Irish could remain an FBS independent and take a wait-and-see approach. This is basically, let's see what happens with the future college football playoff. Let's see how the 16-team Big Ten works. Let's see what television contracts and financial revenues look like. Because of the prestige and the power and the lucrative nature of Notre Dame's brand, conferences will, no doubt about it, wait on Notre Dame to make a decision. So they really hold the cards and the timetable. A lot of these conferences are up in terms of TV negotiations soon, so I'm sure all the conferences would love some clarity real soon on all this, but no doubt about it, Notre Dame is really in no rush to join a conference, so they could take a wait-and-see approach if they wanted to. Another option would be to join the Big Ten and become the 17th member of a very lucrative, powerful conference. And as we mentioned, with the consolidation at the top, having a seat at the table in the Big Ten would be really important for the Fighting Irish in this new age of college football as the sport consolidates around the Power 2. They could also join the ACC, and what a huge financial benefit that would be to the ACC. The creation of the ACC network was huge, but in terms of financial revenue, the conference has fallen behind. The Big Ten and SEC would be difficult for the ACC to keep up without a team like Notre Dame. So if Notre Dame wanted to join the ACC, no doubt about it, the ACC would accept them with open arms, and it could potentially add a huge financial lift to the conference, giving them another big brand to go with Clemson, to go with Florida State, to go with North Carolina, Miami, and others. And finally, there's a wild card in all this. Notre Dame, of course, could join the SEC. The SEC would certainly not turn down the Fighting Irish, but in terms of fit, I think the Big Ten and ACC are much better fits for Notre Dame. The news of USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12 to join the Big Ten were significant dominoes that fell in realignment and expansion for college football this offseason. But make no mistake, if Notre Dame decides to join a conference, the domino effect across the sport will be significant. Other leagues will be forced to make moves. But again, the Fighting Irish can sit back and wait and see what happens with the Big Ten, could see what happens with the college football playoff. Essentially, the major moves potentially in realignment and expansion this offseason hinge on what Notre Dame decides to do. The Pac-12 is expected to add. We'll see what happens with the Big 12. But Notre Dame holds all the cards at this point, because if they go to the Big 10, more expansion is likely coming, creating a domino effect with the ACC and potentially other leagues as well. With all this chaos, with all this uncertainty, there's one thing for sure: news about realignment and expansion is not going anywhere anytime soon. So please stay tuned and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Stephen L. CFB. Be sure to check me out on Instagram and Facebook. We're going to be following this story all off season long, as well as all things college football, to get you ready for the 2022 season.